Okay, it's preparing to live stream. We're not quite there yet.
Shall I message Alan? Shall I message Colin? He says he's coming.
Colin's here.
Okay, we are now live streaming.
Okay, good evening, members, and welcome to the July Executive. Let's get started with apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Thank you, Chairman. No.
Thank you. Okay. Members of the Executive, are you happy for me to sign the minutes of the previous meeting?
Agreed.
Thumbs up, show of hands, or shout agreed, I'm fine. Okay, good. Right, number 3, do we have any declarations of interest for anything we're going to be discussing this evening? Okay. Councillor Wheeler?
Yeah, it's just to do with item 10, the decision to release local land charge over Field 81, is to make everybody aware that I've had conversations both with the current landowners, those people that are potentially named in the original charge, and obviously trying to obtain access to the site as well. So it's just to make everybody within the ward and to make everybody fully aware that I've met with a number of people on site.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jennings-Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My interest is in part 2. Do you need me to declare that now or once we enter part 2?
I can do just now, yeah, while we're on it.
So it is simply that item 12 relates to the ground maintenance arrangements, and as a dual hatter, Windlesham Parish Council is part of that contract, and I am a dual hatter that sits on Windlesham Parish Council as well.
Okay, thank you. Right. I think I would also say, and perhaps on behalf of all of the executive, that I believe we've been written to by the owners of the field that's mentioned in item 10. Right, there's no others. Okay. Questions by members. Are there any questions for myself or the portfolio holders? No. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Alloway.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Am I on? Yes, okay, I've got the unmuted button on. It's in relation to item 5, community infrastructure levy. So reading through the proposals in that one.
Sorry, Councillor Alloway.
Yeah.
I think that the item 4 is fundamentally, do you have any questions for the leader or the portfolio holders that are not going to be on the agenda this evening? Because there will be a time when we do discuss item 5, of course, and then I'll open it up and I'll be happy to hear it. If I'm wrong and you want it's something unrelated, I'm happy to take the question.
No, it's fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, right. Okay, so item 5, right? Community infrastructure levy. Councillor Lewis, this is your paper.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. This item is a 6-month report on the community infrastructure levy collected for the period 1st October to 31st of March. As detailed in paragraph 4.1, a total of £1,013,934.13 was collected. Distribution of these monies is as reported. Those who've done the maths, the missing 144,000 represents the 15% payable to the parishes and the wards. It's obviously noted there are proposed changes into how still monies will be collected. Government will be issuing amended regulations. In the interim, we've been asked to take a more flexible approach to collection. As mentioned previously, the report's due every 6 months and is pretty much self-explanatory. As the executive, we've been asked to note the income received from the 1st of September 2019 to 31st of March 2020, as set out in Annex 1, and notice the likely changes to SIL collection to reflect the impact of COVID-19 on the development.
Not that one. Not that one, Andy. Not Lewis, not Councillor Lewis.
I was going to say, we've just lost Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, I should be back. I don't know why. Just made. I was told.
Let me just, sorry, stop you there for a second, David. Yeah, I should have said at the start, when you're not communicating, can you make sure you're on mute? Because we can, in the chamber, we can hear lots of noises of things going on in the background. And I think everyone was just muted, including Councillor Lewis when you were in mid-flow there. So carry on, David.
Unmuted. No, I was going to open the floor to questions, but can I just remind those of you who are aware and those of you maybe not, I do have hearing problems, which has actually been exacerbated by the Zoom environment. So can you bear it in mind? And if I have to repeat back a question, please don't be offended. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, will do. Okay, do we have any questions on item 5? And I'm going to go straight to Councillor Alloway.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's regarding the text in that proposal that's I can read through, and I just would like if you could confirm that if the proposals now facilitate a reasonable amount of the 85% SIL amount provided by the developers in a location will be spent on infrastructure immediately in the location accommodating mass development. And could the SIL annex identify where the money in the main fund has been spent? And could we see the past 5-year history of the total of SIL collected from each ward?
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to supply a written answer on that because that is obviously very complex. But I would be quite happy to formulate a written response for you.
Just watching.
Okay, many thanks.
Jenny's there.
Okay. Well, just there, Jenny. I don't know if you got Jenny Rickard. I don't know if you got that all of that question there.
Yes,
I wonder if you
the
could shed some
answer
light
is
on that for Councillor Alloway.
All of the money collected over the past 5 years has been reported every 6 months to executive, so we can pull together those amounts. In terms of the money from the borough fund, that's all been agreed at executive, so we can report on what's been agreed by the executive as well. So that's yes, we can do that.
Okay. And also, Councillor Alloway, your question there about SIL money being spent in the ward that it's generated in, I would like to come to that, if I may, at the end, when we've discussed it, because I'd like to give you my view on that, if I may. Okay, other questions? I did see some hands up, but I didn't. Councillor Galliford.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to look at point 6.2 under prosperity. Just wondering what improvements have been made to local transport. What are we anticipating? And also where it says about infrastructure, are we including such things as cycling and walking with regards to that, or were we talking more about buildings when we talk about infrastructure? I have one other question, but if you'd like to answer that first, please.
Okay, thank you. Jenny again.
From the borough fund, because obviously that's the only money we control, to date, the money has been spent on highway improvements, or is being spent. So that was the cycle route, contribution towards the cycle route on the Blackwater Valley Relief Road, the Meadows gyratory improvements. Money is being put forward towards the A30 improvements, which will include improvements to the cycle routes on the A30, and of course, money for the improvements to Camberley High Street. So it's actually all been spent on transport infrastructure improvements to date.
Thank you for that, and I'm pleased to hear that cycling is a priority, obviously, and I hope that will be the case as we move forward. The next point under 9.1, I'm a little bit confused about this because it sounds like it read, when I read it anyway, as if we give SIL revenue to Surrey County Council to prioritise the improvement of our infrastructure. So to me, that sounds like we're giving them money to bump us up the list of what they're going to be doing. Is that what the money is for, or is the money as part of the payment to have the work done? I'm totally unclear on this. I wonder if someone could elucidate.
I think the rules, I don't think we pay county to bump us up the list. I think I know what Jenny's going to say there, but the rules on what we can do with it in order to improve infrastructure are quite broad. And it is something we are allowed to do and have done, I believe, in the past in order to partially fund an improvement into our borough. But Jenny, do you want to just give a bit more to that for Councillor Galliford?
Yes, the cost of the feasibility work for these schemes is quite significant. And whilst you can capitalise that across against the schemes in the long term, you have to put the funding up in the first place. So the boroughs in Surrey have all agreed to put a contribution in towards the central fund. We agreed 100,000, but that's a lot less than some other boroughs who collect a lot more SIL than we do. We don't actually hand the money over to Surrey, we bank it ourselves, and we have the option when there's a scheme that we want to support for them to be able to draw down the money. But essentially it's to enable Surrey County Council to undertake feasibility work on schemes which support the boroughs and districts. But we hold our money, we just reserve it for them. We don't hand it over until they actually need it.
Okay, thank you. That's quite reassuring. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other hands? No. Okay. All right. So I know here we're being asked to note two things: the SIL monies received in the period, and note the likely impacts of COVID-19 on income, which of course will be negative. Just to come back to your question, Councillor Alloway, about the money being spent in the ward. In my 6 years with being a councillor, I don't think SIL money is being used very well. I don't think it's the council's fault. I think it's the rules that we have in place. We've got, I think that this thing says that we've collected over £1 million. And there's a list called, from the 123 list, it's called, I believe, and it gives all of the areas, play parks, green areas, roads, all sorts that we are capable of spending money on, but the vast majority of what we do spend is simply on roads. Okay, and most of it is because it's councillor driven, right? The rule is that, and I understand the theory, whoever takes the hit of taking the housing gets the benefit of the SIL. Right? But the trouble with that is that the way we're currently organised is that the councillors who are in that ward have to come up with the projects. They basically have to manage those projects through, including in some cases getting quotes, etc., for the thing to be spent. And it's an uphill battle, which I actually believe is a fundamental reason why SIL does not get spent very well, or at all. And this money builds up. We also don't allow, really, for instance, say Old Dean doesn't get a gigantic amount of development. Rodney and Sean may disagree with me, but they don't get a huge amount, and therefore they don't get a lot of SIL. But I would argue that they have a very large demand for infrastructure improvement. At the same time, Town takes a lot of development, but I would argue has less reason for infrastructure development. Okay, and I think that SIL money actually needs a very strong, complete overhaul. I would like to see, I think, 3 things happen with SIL. And so I would like to add this to the recommendations, if I may, that we have a paper come back to executive. I think that number 1 is that we should be pooling all of the SIL money that we have. And I fully accept that priority for projects should be given to those projects within the ward that generated the SIL in the first place. So I'm going to take Town. If Town have got a project and it's competing for something else and Town have generated the funds, then Town should be given the priority. But if there's no projects coming forward from Town, then their funds go into the general pool and it can be allocated to any ward, and therefore the whole borough benefits from it. Okay, you often find this limit of the ward that the neighbouring wards get some of the brunt, like for instance traffic, but because the houses were technically built over the boundary, they don't get any of the SIL money, they don't get any of the benefit. So pooling for me is a #1 thing that we should be doing. Number 2, we should be looking to broaden out not just roads, but we should be looking out to broaden it much wider than it currently is, so that we do spend it on other things. And the third one, I think, which is, again, it would change SIL completely, is that I think we should put the fact that we have this money available, we should put it on the website, and we should encourage community groups to apply for grants, and they can work with the councillors, they can work with the council, they can do some partial funding themselves. SIL money can be allocated to their projects. And what we do is we actually start to develop the projects that community groups want in their wards, which they can now tackle because the money is pooled. All right. So I'm sorry that's a really long answer to your question. Is the money used in the ward that it generates? And up until now, I would say that is how it's been. But I honestly believe that SIL is a huge pot of money that could be doing the benefit of the residents. And because of our own rules, we're not allowing it to happen. And I think it should be completely revamped. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I do appreciate the moves in the right direction. Certainly, I can speak for our ward, which must have contributed well over 3 million into those collective funds, but we've had 0 committed or spent on the infrastructure projects that us ward councillors for the borough, along with our county council ward councillor, have got 12 projects identified that we've been pushing for progress on for maybe 2 years now. In fact, both Surrey County Council, local area committee, borough councillors and leaders have had a visit around West End in our ward to see these sort of deprived areas of highways, pavements and highway safety, which has all been exacerbated by the extra traffic coming through. So we have those projects identified. We would like to cost them up, but we can't get the information out of Surrey County Council, which is another bone of contention really, but we're all ready to go. We've got projects identified that we can spend some of that money.
I would bet money there's projects all over the borough that are stalled, and I would like to unlock the potential of SIL for right across the borough, because I do think our current rules just stop us doing that. Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Leader. And I'm pleased to say that I agree with what you've just put there. I have on at least three or four occasions commented and given pretty much the same speech every time this has come up, highlighting the injustice of Town and Old Dean, not because I have anything against the town councillors, but because it's always been ridiculous that community services which happen to be hosted in Old Dean, but used by town residents, were not entitled to be used for SIL, particularly on developments that may be near the ward boundary. I've always thought we should be looking at a radius to the development rather than an artificial ward boundary. But I'm quite happy with your suggestion of pooling, because I think in that way we would then see the money going to where it is needed and where the residents need that to go. So I think that's a positive step in the right direction. And on this occasion, I'm happy to credit your idea.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you. In Parkside, we have actually used SIL money quite a bit. We originally had play equipment for Southcote Park, and we were fortunate enough to get some money from Frimley Fuel Allotments because we had a roundabout installed, which was for disabled children. We had a couple of pieces of equipment like that. So we did have we were lucky enough to be able to do seal money for that, also for Evergreen Road play area, and recently we had some more for Southcote Park, and also for a speed reduction on the Portsmouth Road to try and remind people that just because it's a straight road, you haven't got to go a breakneck speed. And there is actually a speed limit, and COVID-19 doesn't mean you can go through red lights and things like that, which some people seem to think so. I'm not sure if everybody knows about the 1, 2, 3 list. I mean, it is quite extensive, but I think it does cover a lot of things. I mean, we haven't had any problem. We haven't had to get quotes. We haven't had to chase people. I mean, obviously we have to wait because it has to go to an executive for approval. So it does take time. And I think pooling money is quite a good idea, but to open it up to grants for special projects and things, I think that it is a role of a local councillor to see what they have in their area. And I would have thought that they would be able to either get some pooled money or their own seal money. I think opening up to it could be all sorts of different things, and I think it's better to leave it as it is, as a 1, 2, 3, because it does cover a lot of things, but perhaps not everyone knows what the list is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Okay, if there are no more comments, then I'd ask the executive to note the SIL monies received in the period and note the likely impacts of COVID-19 on income in the future. Okay, and I would also then request that we have a paper come to the executive. We'll certainly debate it, Councillor Hawkins. I think it's important, as I said, that the money is pooled, but I also think there should be priority for the wards that have generated the SIL. But I'd like to see it much, much more broadly used. And I would love to be oversubscribed for SIL money as opposed to it sitting in the bank. Councillor Jenny Rickard.
So could I just ask that the pooling of the money is clarified to be for the non-parish wards, because that's their 15%. The parish wards already get their 15%. So West End has received something like £500,000 of SIL for it to spend on things it wants to spend on, and the sorts of projects that Councillor Allaway were talking about are revenue projects which SIL can't fund. And we need to just be quite clear about what we're doing with the money. So in terms of the pooling, it's only the non-parish wards, because the parish wards, legally, the money has to go to them. We can't pool their money.
If you're saying, which I think you are, they already get 15% of the SIL
Yes.
automatically. There's
Yes.
an argument for the money has already been dispersed to the ward. I would say it doesn't then need to cover the parishes, but I wouldn't actually rule out community groups within those wards that have parishes applying for money, and perhaps they get funded from both the parish and the borough if it's significant enough. I wouldn't want to rule out options, but I'd like to see the options in the paper. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so quick show of hands. Are we happy to note the 2 items, small 1, small 2? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, okay, thank you. All right. Item 6. Business and Planning Act 2019-21, licensing implications. Okay, so the government, obviously, in trying everything they can to kickstart the economy, are putting a new law through Parliament aimed at helping bars, cafes, restaurants and pubs to increase their trade through making it easier and quicker to get a license to use space outside their premises, so they can put tables and chairs and serve food and drinks out there. This is a temporary change to the normal system of licensing, and is planned to come to a halt in September 2021. The significant changes are that they are shifting the authority to grant what is being called a pavement license from county to borough. In the old system, you have 28 days of consultation, which includes the police and the fire brigade, I believe. Okay, that's being changed to 7 days consultation. And the borough has another 7 days in order to make a decision. So we've gone from 28 days consultation to 14 days for the decision to be made. And the rule will be that if on the 15th day they have not had a decision, the premises are automatically granted the pavement license. So this is really a massive change in terms of how we have street sales going on. It will also, I do see you, Councillor Wheeler, I'll come back to you in a second. The other paper is that on sales, so pubs who only have a license to be able to sell in the pub, will also be automatically granted a license to do off sales. So people can take away bottles of wine or whatever it is. And finally, they're setting the fee at £100 to apply for it, which may sound like a lot to some people, but I believe that's a fraction of what the county currently charges, which I think from memory is £350. Right. So, okay, that's the essence of the paper. Oh yes, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can just add something, Mrs. Lolly and Mrs. Barnshaw are here. You, members, you may not be able to see them on screen, but I have been asked just to point out that the bill reached the House of Lords stage yesterday, and it's receiving its third reading. The House of Lords has made a number of amendments to the bill, which may be included in the Act, and that's actually being considered by Parliament today as we speak. And it's likely to be receiving royal assent within the next few days. A significant amendment, if that is approved, is that these functions will become non-executive functions. And I know Councillor Bates is on as Chairman of Licensing, and I know Mrs. Lolly and Mrs. Barnshaw have spoken to Councillor Bates today. So on the basis that that is a possibility, this could then also need to go to Licensing Committee, because it would become a non-executive function. At the moment, it's a bit silent, so it's an executive. We're taking it as an executive function. It is on the agenda that's just been published for licensing next week as a verbal update. But I just wanted to share that with you, which is literally hot off the press, that we wouldn't have been able to brief you on before.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all right, Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose it's the resource implications that are of some concern to me, in understanding how we are expecting officers who are not sitting around at the moment twiddling their thumbs suddenly being in a position whereby they can respond to this in the timescales that are needed, and also whether or not ward councillors will be informed of an application. Because with the best will in the world, the ward councillors know each of the locations within their wards better than anyone else. You know, I'm thinking very specifically about Chobham and Windlesham, where we have very narrow pavements. So if a licence to serve alcohol was served on some of our premises, it just doesn't work. So I'm just thinking about speeding up the process, what involvement would be expected from ward councillors, how that would be governed, and also how the council is expecting to manage the resource requirements on officers who are already stretched.
Thank you. Just looking around for who's best placed to answer the resources question.
I think.
You want to give the microphone on? Thank you. Oh. Green button and point the mic at you. There you go. That's it. Perfect.
I think we've given consideration to the resources involved. I've been asked to step in. My name is Helen Lolly. I work here in a number of areas, and I've been asked to step in and set in place the processes that we need to have ready for when it receives royal assent. In terms of the resources, we have there is a gentleman starting on Monday to boost the resources that we've got within the licensing team. And then within environmental health, we're using some of the resources that are there to do some of the checks that we need in place to make sure that we can validate these applications.
If the recommendations change.
So, you know, and we will keep a record of this, because what we don't know at this moment is how many applications we're likely to receive, and therefore what the overall resource implications are. But we will be keeping a close eye on that to make sure that we can respond, really, because 14 days, yes, you're absolutely right, it's quite a short time. 7 days of those are actually consultation.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you. It's a good question, because obviously it's coming down, as a number of these things are, from central government very, very quickly. And once again, local authorities being asked to respond. And I think that you're going to have 50% of the population hate this idea and 50% of the population love this idea. And of course, we as councillors will all get caught in the middle, won't we? So I think, Councillor Bates, did I see your hand up? Yep.
Yes, thank you. So if I stick my licensing committee hat on just for a moment, just on the specific question about local ward councillor involvement, I can confirm that that is specifically covered in paragraph 3.3, where it does say that the council will consult with Borough Council Environmental Health Service, Borough Council Planning, Surrey Fire and Rescue Service and Police, the appropriate local ward councillors and the appropriate parish or town council. So the councillors should, as a matter of course, be consulted about the applications. That was a point that I know had been previously raised and I think covered. In terms of the issue of resource, this is something which I had already raised privately on a couple of occasions, and because I am concerned about the potential risk and that we don't know how much resource that may be needed. I am aware that Mr. Passion has made some temporary arrangements, which have just been alluded to there. In the event that we don't have sufficient resource, then I am very happy to have a conversation with the leader and portfolio holders to make them aware of that, should there be a need for the executive to consider anything further. But obviously we'll be guided by officers about that and managers in relation to that. And Mr. Passion, who's obviously away this week, will be able to advise us further on that. But it is something I'm very mindful of. We don't know the amount of resource that will be involved. And I have to say, and I'll take just finally, the amount of hard work that's gone in for this report very, very quickly is immense. And I'd like to thank Mrs. Barnshaw and Mrs. Lolly for the hard work in actually putting together this report very quickly.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to endorse Councillor Bates' point. Thank you very much for that hard work. It is a good report. Okay, Councillor Tapper.
Thank you, Chair. It's a shame really that probably in the town centre, the premises which could best make use of this, i.e. those ones on the high street, which I think currently don't have or have never applied for a pavement licence simply because of the problems of the high street of the width of the pavement, are the ones which will not be able to benefit from this because, of course, the high street is currently still being reconstructed. However, when we look at Park Street and Obelisk Way, for instance, off of Park Street, we have a number of premises which are already serving on the pavement and presumably already have pavement licenses. I'm just wondering whether this change in the law is going to impact any of these current pavement licenses and whether that will affect the income that the council will get from them.
I can't imagine they're going to come back to. So the question is, will people who have a current pavement license gotten the old way through county and all the rest of it, will they in any way be impacted by this? I imagine their license for a pavement table and chairs carries on past September 21 when this legislation finishes. So I'm being told that anyone who has a current license for out on the pavement will not be impacted by this new legislation.
Other than having a wider pavement.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right, Councillor Tapper. If you look at some artists' impressions of the new High Street when the public realm is finished, it is chock full of tables and chairs outside and people enjoying drinks with little umbrellas in them. So, okay, Councillor Duggan.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether there's any guidance notes that we can provide to the applicants as to what a good application looks like, so there's not a whole bunch of toing and froing. I presume they must exist within the current process with the county council. I would imagine, you know, a diagram with dimensions of what they're looking for, so that the application can be easily understood and I guess to a degree easily enforced. So that they don't, you know, take up the entire pavement and people have to walk into the road to walk past, etc., etc. But it's quite blank at the moment, and you know there will be businesses potentially who have never applied, under the existing scheme might want to apply under this one, and it would be good to help them as much as we can. I don't know whether Councillor Bates has a view on what happens today. I don't suppose it runs through you, it runs through county, doesn't it?
I'm not sure if I understood the question entirely there, because obviously at the back of the paper there is guidance for businesses for pavement licenses, etc. But you're right.
If you read the guidance for businesses, it doesn't tell you how to provide a good application.
Right. Okay.
What is required in the application for it to be reviewed and approved? Doesn't.
A customer guide to how to get it through quickly, as opposed to this more technical whys and wherefores.
Indeed.
Yeah. Can we provide what I might call an idiot's guide to applying?
Yes. So there's guidance, I think, attached to the agenda.
Yes. Yep.
And then there'll be an e-form application. You're quite right. There will be a plan submitted with the application, with measurements on and dimensions for tables and chairs, and what the requesting is on there. So.
Okay.
But we can do exactly what you've just suggested.
We can do that.
We can do what you suggest, which is to do a briefer note because the Act actually specifies what they need to provide, and we can just confirm that in the bullet points. Yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Of that, but it certainly sounds like it's all in hand, and a map will be required as part of the application, so that we can see that pavements will be kept clear, which, let's face it, is our main concern, isn't it? Okay, Councillor White.
We have a unique situation in Bagshot that we have the Bagshot Square that's a triangle, not a square. And there's various businesses, I think officers will be aware of emails going backwards and forward at the moment regarding the putting out of tables and chairs on the square. That is not their immediate pavement. So would there be different legislation for that, or can we include what's happening here in that?
Good question. Okay, so do you know the gist of the question?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. In terms of what you're talking about, the Act actually suggests that the area that we can license is adjacent to premises. I think the area that you're talking about isn't, but you may be able to make an application to the owner of the land, which I believe is
maybe highways.
Maybe Surrey County Council, for a license under their permitting scheme, which is running in parallel at the moment, to have a permit to operate in the way that you'd like to go forward with.
Okay. Did you get that, Councillor White?
Yes, most of it, yeah.
Yeah, what we're saying is that if the land, I'm guessing if the land isn't the pavement outside your front door, okay, then you'll struggle with this system, but use nothing to stop you going through the old system with the county and applying for that. I know that there are cafes that are close to the square triangle, and of course you have to cross the road to get to the triangle for 2 of those 3 businesses that would use it. So, but I think we would be adopting the position of trying to help businesses to get up and running as much as possible. We're going to be definitely pro-business here while trying to maintain good pathways. Okay, if there's no other questions, all right. Then I'd ask the executive, we need to resolve that we have to delegate authority to the executive head of community to determine the applications. We have to delegate authority to the executive heads of community, regulatory and transformation for the remaining license provisions, including enforcement. The executive head of business needs to be authorised to determine any appeals. The fee for the pavement license be set at £100, and the guidance to businesses attached to Annex 8 be noted. Are we happy with that, members of the executive? Yes. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, item 7, end of year performance report 2019-20. We're being asked to note this report. This report is the same report that was, I would say, I attended the meeting of the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee, and I would say that they had a thorough review of this report. It was noted that everything is being given a red, amber or green indication to show progress. I just had a quick count up of the 31 targets, 22 are green, 6 are amber, 3 are red. And I note in reading the papers and from the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee that, as one would expect, the majority of the delays came towards the end of the year, which was heading in towards the COVID crisis. So I would like to just open it up to see if there have any questions. Any members? No? Okay. All right. Councillor Tapper?
Yes, we've actually on Heatherside been the beneficiary of the refurbishment of play areas, particularly Maguire Drive, which was completely replaced, fortunately under S106 funding through the Heathlands development on the old Ridgewood Centre. And that's been beautifully finished and is a great asset. But there are some other newer play areas across Heatherside that are not in need of complete replacement, but just need basically refurbishment. And I'm just wondering whether or not, obviously this will cost far less than the total replacement of all the play equipment. Wondering how that might fit into this particular part of the refurbishment scheme across the borough.
Okay, I think that we can have someone talk about the refurbishment scheme across the borough. But what I would say is that, and Daniel's there, keen, ready to come in. What I would say is that probably the obvious that everyone else is thinking, and I'm sure you are as well, Councillor Tapper, if we can make these changes to the SIL funding, then that would be an absolutely obvious community project for them to then say, look, let's refurbish play parks. If that's what our residents want and we have the money for it, then that's exactly what we should be doing. Daniel, do you want to just answer Councillor Tapper on our programme for refurbishing and replacing play parks just for a second?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to say, obviously, we're coming to the end now of our last tranche of refurbishment, which was agreed 3 years ago by the council. And that was when we released a large sum of PIC money at the time to do that. And that was this collective pool of money that we were able to release. So if your recommendations are agreed, Chair, in relation to freeing up some SIL money that's currently held within specific wards, then obviously we will be very keen to then look at the next phase of how we keep our play areas up to standard. And we would then start at the cut-off line last time, where some, as Councillor Tapper said, some play areas didn't quite make it into the last one because they were in a decent enough condition. But obviously 3 years has passed since then, and some of those areas are now in need of refurbishment and replacement of certain pieces of equipment as well. So yeah, we'd really like to look at that.
Good. Excellent, thank you. Okay, members of the executive, all we're being asked to do is note the report. Is the report duly noted?
Read.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right. Item 8, Council finances as at the 31st of March 2020 and a request to carry forward funding. Councillor Lewis, this is your paper.
Thank you, Leader. As you say, this is the financial report for the year ending 31st of March 2020. It's covering the pre-COVID period, or the calm before the storm, as it were. So before I present this report, I think I want to make a quick statement about our current financial situation. It's not only to keep the executive informed, but also reassure anyone who's tuned in to watch the meeting. This council has a long-established risk management process, and Section 151 officers have ensured that sufficient reserves were set aside to manage risks arising from fluctuations in commercial income streams, interest rate changes, business rates, and general economic shocks. As such, this council is in a strong position to manage the pressures that are emerging from the pandemic. To do with the report, it's created in line with local authority accounting rules, so it only covers controllable costs and only the costs that impact the overall financial outturn. Overall, 2019-2020 was a challenging year. There were pressures on both income and costs, but despite this, it was a relatively successful year. As you'll note from the table on page 61, we ended 2019-2020 financial year with an underspend of £181,000. Our borrowing at the year end stood at 160 million, 56 million of which is made up of longer term loans with the Public Works Loan Board. The remainder is short-term loans from other authorities. As stated in paragraph 2.4, Council has entered into an agreement to forward fix 50 million of that debt over the years 2020-21 and 21-22 to minimise the risk of interest rate increases. As far as debt is concerned, we had 3.8 million in sundry debts and 554,000 in housing benefit overpayments. Annex A to report documents all significant variations to the budget, or to be more precise, all variations over £25,000. As you will note, the majority of areas reported have come in under budget. Some of the larger surpluses are due to government grants being received towards the end of the year, along with some fees for larger planning applications. These will be processed over the coming year. I'd also like to draw the committee's attention to the business rates and council tax collection ratios on page 11. Earlier version. At 99.55% and 99.15%, this is one of the highest collection rates in the country. Annex B details our investments, and as of the 31st of March, that time stood at just under 14 million, yielding a return of 206,000, which was 66,000 above budget. As an executive, we've been asked to note the financial performance for the year 2019-20. We have a recommendation from Performance and Finance that the executive should consider that Section 151 officer lead a budget setting process following zero-based budgeting principles. We're also being asked to carry forward requests totaling £170,507. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Okay, are there any questions? Okay, all right. So we are being asked, Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee have made a recommendation that we move to a zero-based budgeting principle. This has obviously been discussed with Simon Little and the Chief Exec. Simon, can you just give us a couple of points on where we are with your thinking, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've had a discussion with with CMT, and we've talked about how this can possibly be done, whether we can do it as an all services or whether to do certain services. We are obviously post-COVID resource a little bit shy of the amount of resources I would have wanted to do a full exercise. So I'll be coming back with a paper to indicate what we think we can do to deliver this particular approach.
Okay, thank you. I think we're all acutely aware of what COVID has done to our income. All right. We all know that we've spent a serious amount of money on helping protect our most vulnerable residents, and it's cost us a lot of income. And going forward, we're going to be down on car parking, we're going to be down on charges, we're going to be down on rental income from our investments, etc. Okay, and that puts us in a very, very tough position going forward, when I certainly have declared that my position is I do not want to cut any services. All right, and if that option's taken off the table, then that gives us only two others: cut costs or generate more income. So we're in a tough spot, and I, for one, am thinking if zero-based costing can help us, then it's something that gets my support. And I look forward then to receiving your paper, which can tell us not only what it will take to implement, but also what benefits we'll get from it. Okay. All right. And the other thing is we're being asked to look at Annex C and okay that 170,507 is carried forward. We've done this in the past. This is so that we're not caught in the loop of use it or lose it. Okay, so can I just have the executive indicate that they're happy to go with those notes? Thank you. Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, right. You're busy tonight, Councillor Lewis. This is review of corporate capital programme 2019-20 plus the providential indicators. That's your paper. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. This is a report on the capital outturn for 2019-2020 and the Council's actual performance against the 2019-2020 capital prudential indicators. For 2019-20, the actual capital expenditure during the year was £7,895,000. We've been asked to recommend to Council that annual capital expenditure for 2019-2020 of £7,895,000 against a budget of £40,328,000 be noted. The carry forward budget provision of £32,406,000 from 2019-2020 into 2020-21 be approved. Revised 2020-21 capital programme of £33,885,000 be noted, and the final capital progenitor indicators of 2019-2020 be noted. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this paper? It's funny, we can discuss play parks and things for an hour and a half, but when we start talking about prudential indicators and things, there's very few amongst us. And talking of which, Councillor Malvaginam.
Thank you, Councillor McLafty. I'm actually confused as to why we would actually allocate a 40 million budget and spend only 8 million on capital expenditure. I mean, is there a breakdown of this 40 million, or was it a best guesstimate at that time? And then we are carrying forward another 33.85 million into 2021. Is there a breakdown on that, Leader?
Simon?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, page 75 is the breakdown. And the reason is that the capital budget is the total cost of budget of the capital schemes, which by their nature can run over more than 1 year and often over multiple years.
Thank you. And Simon, Councillor Malvaginam just suggested he would like some clarification. Did you just do a best guesstimate of whatever it would be for the year, or was there actually some serious working out of the number?
There would have been serious working out of the number. We would never do anything by best guesstimate.
Thank you.
My predecessor or myself.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Malvaginam.
Thank you, Chair. Just a straightforward question again. Of the 33.8 million we are carrying forward, is it only to be carried forward into 2021, or is it a rollover into 2022 and so on and so forth? Is there a planned expenditure on this, please?
There would be planned expenditure. It would roll over until those schemes have been delivered or the council decides not to go forward with them.
I have some sympathy for Councillor Malvaginam's what's behind that question. In my business, that's not how I would actually manage the capital expenditure budget. Of course, it would be broken up and timed, and it would hit my P&L on a normal basis. Is that different to how it's then handled within local authority, as with so many other things?
The short answer is no, you can do it that way in a local authority. And I've certainly done that at other authorities where we break it down by year. And then the roll forwards have to only be those amounts that have not been spent in a year, which we know we're going to spend in the following year.
Right. So that's a choice that we have made in the past. And yes, essentially we could change to make that clearer going forward.
Absolutely, that is your prerogative, and it's prerogative of the 151 officer to do as well. So
thank you. Okay. I don't see any other hands, so I'll go back to, no, sorry, Sashi, I was just saying, because you've spoken a couple of times, just in case there was anyone else, but it's only you, so Councillor Malvaginam.
Thank you, Chair. My other question is, of the capital expenditure, the obvious impact is a cash. Are we sufficiently confident that we would have cash in the preceding coming years going forward? Has the cash flow been done, or is it all going to be part of the zero-based budgeting process?
Thank you. Simon?
This wouldn't be part of, well, only in the sense of that we will have, much of this will either have to be borrowed or we'll use capital receipts. Obviously, we've got the cash for the capital receipts, but sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Do apologise.
That's okay. I think the question was, have we done a cash flow forecast for the upcoming 12 months? And would a cash flow be a normal part of a zero-based budgeting process? I don't know. I stand corrected if it's not, but I don't anticipate that a cash flow is part of zero-based budgeting. but I'm absolutely certain we've done a cash flow forecast. But if you could just confirm.
Yes, we have, but that's the nature of local government budgeting and accounts, is that you have to get back to cash. So all of our when we do our accounts, for instance, we have to do movement in reserves, and that's basically a cash position. So the answer is our very planning process takes into account the cash flow.
Okay, and to get to the core of Councillor Mavagnam's question, there was just a question about, are you confident that we have the cash that we require to see ourselves through the next 12 months, the next financial year? Can you give us an indication of what kind of cash you have in reserve that you could get your hands on if required?
Well, we've got the borrowing requirement that we have, which means that we can have up to, I think, £40 million, which is kind of equates to our reserves position. At the end of the last financial year, I think that was standing at around 11 million. I think last week when I last looked at it, we had something like 18 million. Right. So we can borrow the rest of it.
18 million on investment that we could turn into cash as required.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Mavagnam? Thank you. Okay. All right, there being no other questions, can I have the executive, we're asked to recommend to council, as Councillor Lewis laid out those four points there. I'm just going to call them small 1, small 2, small 3, small 4 on the paper. Are we happy to recommend to council those 4 points? Yes. Yes. Yep. Okay. Yeah, it's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item 10. Okay. Now, the executive well understands that this is not an ordinary item. Okay, it is something which is we have to handle with professionalism and delicacy here. I'm asked by the monitoring officer to remind both the members and the executive that this item is not about the history of the property, nor is it about the costs associated with the property, nor is it about the relative merits of the decisions that were taken regarding the property. This is the monitoring officer, who will take us through it in a moment, has found, I'm going to call it an anomaly, has quite rightly brought it to the attention of the executive. And again, quite rightly, it's being done in part 1 so that it's out in the open and it's transparent that this has happened and we need to deal with it. So I just ask, if any member starts to talk about something which strays off of this paper, I will be saying we need to stop that and get back on the paper. So as long as everyone understands that, thank you. Okay, right, thank you. So, Gavin?
Okay, good evening, members. So item 10 contains a report that I've written in my capacity as monitoring officer, and that's pursuant to my duties to bring to your attention anything that I consider where there may be compliance issues. So that's the basis of the report that you have before you, and I appreciate that it's unusual and you don't see these reports very often, if at all, in some cases. I think the report is relatively straightforward and self-explanatory, but I'll take you through the salient points as concisely as I can. But in short, a local land charge was placed over Field 81 in July 2006, and that local land charge related to some clearance works over the site. In 2018, the land charge was removed, and essentially the paper sets out that it isn't clear to me that the correct processes were followed in order to remove the land charge. And I must stress that what I'm saying in the report is that it only appears to me, because I flagged up some reasons in the report that may help understand why the decision was made, and they are primarily that I consider there is some ambiguity in the Constitution in terms of how we treat local land charges, and also it isn't clear to me that the Constitution treats local land charges as debts for the purposes of the financial regulations. So it isn't a clear situation, and that's why I've drafted the report to confirm that it only appears to me that potentially our processes haven't been followed in terms of delegations and authority. And you'll also note that I've set out in section 3 the limitations of the report, in that there may well be meetings and correspondence that I'm not aware of, but I don't think they would necessarily change the fundamental points that it still isn't clear to me that the correct processes have been followed. So that's essentially the issue, which is fundamentally, as I've said, the removal of the local land charge and whether the correct processes were followed. It's not any more complicated than that. And I've set out in section 6 my thoughts on the potential recommendations that you could accept to help mitigate any future reoccurrences of this sort of issue. So if I just quickly take you through them, the proposal is to update the definition of a key decision to make sure that we're capturing the release of securities. And I'm also recommending that our section 151 officer give consideration as to whether local land charges should appear in our accounts, and thereby making it clear that the financial regulations do apply to the removal of local land charges. And I'm also suggesting that no officer may release any security, warranty or guarantee in favour of the council without the written approval of the section 151 officer or the relevant committee. I guess that would depend on the value of the local land charge. So that in summary is the report. I'm happy to take any questions, but I would caution members, as Councillor McClafferty has said at the outset, not to digress from the issues in the report. If there are any questions which I don't consider are appropriate to be dealt with tonight, then I will say that I'm not in a position to answer that question. But hopefully we will stay on topic, and I think it would be appropriate to look at recommendations, and if councillors have other ideas about how we can further strengthen the Constitution, or indeed whether you think it goes too far, I think those sort of points would be fair enough.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Mansfield, I saw your hand up, and then Councillor Wheeler. You're on mute, David.
Thank you very much, Leader. Obviously being very delicate as to how this is approached, and obviously, however, I think it's clearly outlined. There's so many paragraphs that I would question in this. It was described as another anomaly, but that was putting it very delicately. I think that basically it's very clear, as it has already been stated, so I'm not stepping on anyone's ground. Clearly the council's constitution hasn't been followed, and I get the feeling this is being brought to sort of, should we say, get something that's come out since we've been draining the swamp. My query and my recommendation is this: that I would propose that a formal inquiry takes place to find out exactly who knew what when by an outside body, so we can determine exactly what happened here. I think, again, how many other of these little anomalies are going to be brought forward by members of the officers that are still with the council that they're aware of, now that we are draining the swamp? But I'm not happy about this at all, and I do request that we formally propose that a formal inquiry by an outside body takes place to find out what on earth happened, who knew what when, yet again. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to that. Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Leader. I have to say that I would second a full investigation into this. Other things that aren't directly related, but I will just mention, is that the current ownership of the land was secured through adverse possession. My understanding is that it was the council that secured the land, and I think that's something that also needs to be considered when we are considering this. But going very rapidly back into topic before I have my wrists slapped, in 6.4.2, I think I would be much happier to say if we were to give a value in there, and anything above a certain value should actually come back to the executive to make the decision before being ratified by full council. I think as it stands at the moment, there are still some slightly grey areas there. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay, thank you. I think you did skip the line there, but your recommendation or suggestion 6.42, if I'm understanding it, is where you would take out basically the thing unless contractually obliged to do so. So it would be everything would come to the executive.
Yes, maybe above a certain value, so maybe above £10,000 or something, so that you're not, it doesn't, not everything has to come back to the executive, but certainly maybe above a figure that could be agreed amongst the exec.
Okay, thank you. All right, Richard, do you have a view on that? Senator Gavin? Yep.
I think the reason why I've included that wording is, say for example, in our large contracts we may have performance bonds or other guarantees that we would release at the end of the contract as a matter of course if the contract has ended. So I wouldn't necessarily expect to go back to the executive for something like that where there's a clear contractual obligation to release those guarantees. And that's really why the wording is there. If there's a contract for it to happen, then it's just a case of honouring that contract, and presumably the executive would have approved the contract and for the release of that security at the end of the contract for those large contracts. So that's why the wording's in place.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think I saw Councillor Bates. Yep.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the first thing I want to say is that I've been a councillor 17 years and I don't remember a report of this nature ever being registered. I may be wrong, but I think it's the first time. I know that the monitoring officer role has changed somewhat and evolved over that time, but nonetheless, it is obviously disappointing, let's say, that such a report had to be written. For noting, and I think it's important that we do put this on the record. I was the member that raised this with the monitoring officer originally, based on concern from members of my group. So I think that needs to be in the public domain, just as a matter of awareness. In terms of the specific recommendation, I have a lot of sympathy with the idea of an independent investigation. All I would say about it is, I know that the monitoring officer has already looked in some detail at the files. And I think there may be some practical difficulty in holding an investigation purely because a number of the parties that have undertaken a decision that has been highlighted are not here. And it may not necessarily be that easy, therefore, to conduct an investigation. Now, that's not to say that I'm unsympathetic with the issues which have been highlighted by colleagues, but I think there may be some practicalities regarding the particular suggestion, because I'm not totally sure who or how such an investigation could take place, because I don't believe that anyone who was involved in the decision is currently an employee of the council, is my understanding. But again, I'm happy to be corrected on that. Just in terms of the specific options, I think firstly I would encourage, and this is probably going to be covered later, but I would encourage that the governance working group obviously needs to formally consider the constitutional aspects of that. I suspect that the chairman will probably add that anyway to the next agenda of that meeting. I know that there's a date that we're trying to get sorted for that. So I think we do need, as the governance working group, to consider the constitutional aspects of that. And then the final point is just one of clarity, really, as to whether our auditor needs to be made aware if they're not already, because obviously that may be something that they need to be considering. I don't know if they have or haven't been made aware of the situation, but clearly we now need to formalise that situation, and that may be something that we need to do with them.
Thank you. Okay, just taking those in reverse order. I think it's just good practice to let the auditors know that this has happened. I think you're absolutely right. If we do agree to recommend the constitution is changed as part of our corrective actions for this, then it would of course go through governance and then ultimately to full council. And I have to say that I once again find myself in agreement with you on your point. I absolutely have sympathy for the view of Councillor Wheeler, Councillor Mansfield about, you know, should we have an investigation to get to the bottom of this? I think there's a practicality problem, but for me, there's also the problem of what is the potential reward for the cost to have an investigation, and it turns out that we are looking at something that happened several years ago. Decisions were taken for whatever reason they were taken, and can we do anything about it? I think it's highly unlikely. And also, what can we learn about going forward? I think the fact that decisions were taken by people who no longer are at the council is probably part of the corrective action going forward. And what can we learn? I think that I'm with you that I looked at Mr. Payne, everybody's councillor this evening, Mr. Payne, and he nodded when you said, I think it's the first time a paper like this has come to the executive in 17 years, possibly longer. In some ways, I'm glad it has, because it's the right way to deal with something that's been found like this. And I particularly, as I said, wanted it in part one, so that it was out on the table and everyone could see it. And thank you for your part in bringing this forward, Councillor Bates. I appreciate that. So I'm afraid an investigation doesn't have my support purely on the basis of I don't believe there would be any a significant enough gain for the time, effort and cost it would take to have the investigation. But I'm happy to put that to the executive. Is there anyone who would support Councillor Mansfield's view that there should be an investigation? No. Okay, I'm afraid you're on your own there, Councillor Mansfield. What I would do then is move to the recommendations. Now they're in across to, as Mr. Rohan said, 6.3 talks about key decisions should be more clearly defined as they are in red there. 6.4 is it's being recommended that the Section 151 officer gives consideration to whether it's appropriate for these debts to be secured on local land to appear in the council's accounts. And 6.4.2 Constitution is updated to confirm specifically that no officer may release any security, warranty, guarantee in favour of the council unless contractually obliged to do so. I take Mr. Rohan's point about it. If it's contractually, then that shouldn't have to be delayed by coming to the executive. So I'm happy for that to stand. And we are required to consider the report and the recommendations, and the executive have a report made in accordance with those recommendations. Are we agreed, members of the executive? Yeah. Okay. And Councillor Mansfield, do you wish to vote otherwise? Oh, where's he gone? Okay. I did have 6 votes for that, and I was just asking Councillor Mansfield if he had a different view on how he wanted to vote, but he seemed to push some button and disappeared. Here he is. You're still on mute, David. Oh, there you are.
No, no. Sorry, it's just come off. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yeah.
No, I vote against the motion. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's
Thank
perfectly okay. That's yeah. It's democracy. That's what we're having. So it's 6-1 that it's carried. Okay. Thank you. Right. We now go into. Sorry, we're going into number 11, exclusion of the press and public. And I will read out the act which allows us to do that. But I would just like to say, if there is anyone online who is watching us, then thank you very much for attending, and good night.
Okay, I'm just going to come off the live stream.